Welcome to another video of the God Talk series. I haven't done one in a while. I'm working a lot, so these are going to become few. With that said, let's go to the God Talk series. This one's entitled State of Grace. State of Grace. What is really the state of grace? It's the desire of God that his children live in a state of grace, which basically is an obedience within obedience. In a sense, Adam and Eve were in a state of grace, and then they fell from grace. Okay, so we have the natural desire to hurt ourselves and others. Throughout history, because of disobedience, God had to keep correcting his people, sometimes destroying them. Recall the destruction of the great flood, Noah, in which he put a rainbow in the sky, saying he wouldn't do it again. Recall the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Not even look, Lot and his wife shouldn't even look behind to see the destruction. In contrast, look at recall Nineveh, where the people humbled themselves before God, and God did not destroy them. So they were sackcloth and ashes, I believe, and from the king on down, they repented, and God did not destroy them. So God is trying to get us to love him and to love each other, basically. So really a state of grace means you're really unchained from the mortal sin that you've been involved with, or not. Let's say state of grace means you're unchained from mortal sin in via the sacraments, particularly confession and Holy Communion. Okay, the state of grace does not mean we who try to live in the state of grace are better than others. That's a misconception. We're all sinners in need of a doctor, and Jesus is a doctor. So Jesus, the doctor who came to release us from bondage occurred by sin. He sent the Holy Spirit to keep giving us medicine, so to speak, to stay in a state of grace, which is Holy Communion, and then sacraments. And when we fail, we utilize the sacraments. Now, it's important to understand this too. I recall there's a priest, I forget who it was. When you're living in a state of grace, so to speak, there is a tendency to think not you're better than others, but that you might continue living in the state of grace. And I believe there was a priest who had on the wall a couple of people, it might have been Hitler or someone else, that reminded him that he's just a step away from falling. Okay, and then the goal is to persevere in a state of grace to the end. So you pray for perseverance. But yeah. So, however, in Luke 18:9, recall the parable of the Pharisee and the publican, taxpayer, in the temple, whereby the publican humbled himself and did not even look up to God. And the Pharisee basically said, paraphrasing, "Thank you, I'm not like the others, and I'm living in the commandments, and I'm not like the others, doing everything the right way. I'm doing it in the right way." But Jesus said, the sinner went away justified. Well, how could that be? Well, because the sinner humbled himself. Okay, and then I suspect like when you're humbling yourself and going for it, you don't go. What Jesus says, don't go and sin no more. You stop sinning, right? But you're going to go back out into the world where the sin can happen. So recall the parable of the lost sheep, Luke 15:1. He left the 99, they were already under his fold, and went after the one. Recall the lost son. Then the sinning son humbled himself and came back to the father threw a party. Recall the older son's reaction. This is the key one. Recall the older son's reaction. He lived in a state of grace, in a sense, but was angry that his father threw a party for his sinning son. Okay, so that's the tricky part. Once when you withdraw from those things that harm you and cause you to sin, now you have the tendency to look at others like maybe they they seem happier, if you will. I never forget, I had somebody I know came to me, and he basically he lived a very very graceful life, and he always he made this comment. He others seemed to be happier than he was, and that was I think a really interesting point, because uh, it's a how do you say it? It's not really happiness. It's not the interior joy that one experiences. It's more like superficial happy, like happy. But it's superficial, and a lot of people, you know, it's they know they're doing wrong, and they almost like a front, almost like they're laughing at it. You know that. So anyway, so it's, you know, when you get in the when you if you decide to live a Christian lifestyle, you know, sometimes you say, well, how come they're having so much fun? Well, I don't know if they're having so much fun. That's what I'm trying to say. Wouldn't you rather have interior joy than have superficial happiness? That is not really happiness. Anyway, so the point is, God is extremely happy with a repentant and humble sinner. But recall, Jesus' words saying, "Go and sin no more." In other words, you know, after Nineveh, you know, they did sackcloth and ashes. You know, he spared the town, but you know, you can live like a, how do you say? You don't have to continue in the sackcloth and ashes, but you know, go out and just you know, overdo, if you will. Right now, though, in USA 2024, we're living in a society on the way to Sodom and Gomorrah. We're kind of already halfway there, if you will. One can compare it to a sewer, like immorality. It's very unlikely that one would not get caught up in the smell or sin. Okay, either watching TV or movies, or you know, they promote debauchery as if it's cool. You know, get people living together all the time. Contraception is part of the culture now, etc., etc. It's a sewer. It's a sewer of immorality, and it's upside down. You know, what seems quote good is not really good. You know, so probably the best way to get to the state of grace is after one repents by way of confession, uh, and is to avoid the near occasion of sin. So what do I mean by that? One will come to a point, you know, realize you're doing something wrong. You know it, so you need to go to confession. Um, saying I'm not, you know, saying Jesus forgives me is not confession. Jesus does forgive us. However, he left the church and the mechanisms of the church. So that might help, but it's not going to completely do, if you will. So when you start to live a life of avoiding near occasions of sin, because now you realize that's the direction that's causing me problems, this is going to hurt you. Okay, you're in a sense you're going to be removed from those things you've done. You're going to have to find a new way of living, in a sense, or slowly. Sometimes you have to do it abruptly. You know, it's like some people who are alcoholics, they have to quit cold turkey. Some can do it casually, but you know, that's when you want to avoid the near occasions of sin. You know, we'll talk about that in a second. You're going to lose your family sometimes, your friends, your relatives. You know, people will call you different things. You won't be invited to parties, possibly. People look at you different. They might say things that oh, I'm sorry, I swore in front of you, or they do this, and that's just because you're trying to live a good life and they don't want to try. And why? Because you remind them of what they might be doing wrong. So it's a tricky call. You might have to find new friends, if you will. I'm not an advocate of that. I think you just have to find the commonalities. So, example, if you have a music commonality with a friend, then stick with music. You don't have to go party with them. Or if you guys like to do fishing together, go out and fish, but you don't have to go to a party and fish. Or you know what I'm saying. Keep those commonalities. I don't think you should get rid of all your friends. It's just not what I'm trying to say. However, you might not be invited to you know, what do you call it? Weddings, wedding, what do you call them? Jack and Jill's, where they, have a party before the wedding, or you have a bachelor party or bachelorette party. You may not be invited to those things, or you might have to decline because someone's going to be stripping, whatever. So this is kind of what do I mean. You're going to be hurting because you're going to possibly lack that social life. However, what the flip side is, you can change that into a more prayerful life and they get that interior joy that is lacking when you go in this party, like a superficial happiness, if you will. So you might not, here's some other things. So you might not want to watch so much football on a Sunday. Well, I know some people that's what they do on Sunday. Well, Sunday's a holy day. You should be praying to God and maybe reading the Bible or watching a religious movie or whatever it is. Or going for a nice walk in nature, or doing those things that are, if you will, clean, and or if you have, with your family, spend more time with your children or whatever. Instead of watching football all day with a beer, I mean, that's what I mean. It's going to hurt a little bit. If you can't control your drinking, I'm going to make a point about this right now. Sometimes sin, doing problems with like drugs or alcohol, they can lead to other things like obsession, chemical dependence. And so if you don't enter into those things in the first place, you're not going to probably become chemical dependent. Nowadays, people are smoking pot all the time. Well, I just found out someone I know is now going into basically is basically going to be on medications or maybe institutionalized because he smoked too much pot, because the chemical induces hallucinations and he became paranoid, possibly, or whatever the diagnosis they gave him. So, doing something wrong a lot is going to lead to something. Some people aren't affected. The problem is you don't know if you're going to be affected or not. Like drinking alcohol is not sinful. Drinking alcohol, enjoying a wine is not sinful. However, to some, they can't do it. And so it becomes sinful in a sense, because if they can't have just one, they have to have 5,000, then you got a problem, okay? It's just that you're built differently than other people. Some people can handle a wine or two, and that's it, they go to bed or whatever. That's okay. Or a beer or two. So anyway, drugs is different. Some drugs are a little bit more addictive, okay? If you're going to go on cocaine, then you do one hit or whatever it is, and then you may be hooked on it forever. You don't know. So anyway, so back to, if you can't control your drinking or in moderation, and sometimes people act in bad ways. Some people are a little bit more lustful. The goal is to, get the girl and see if she has a lot of drinks, then she's easier. Or if some guys tend to get, they like to it brings out their bravado, if you will, and they like to get in fights. That obviously that's not right. However, when you're brought up in a culture like that, you don't know. You got to figure it out. That's not right or wrong. You got to figure out what's right and wrong, and because sometimes you just don't know until someone tells you, or you have to figure it out. But then it might be too late because you're already engaged in these things. However, it's not too late. It's never too late. You can always go to confession anytime. If you're dating women and you don't want to marry them, or you're using them, or they're using you, you're gonna probably have to break it off. There's no point. That's the sin of lust, and etc. If you tend to boast about yourself, then you should try to lift up others and not talk about yourself so much. This is just the problem with a lot of people don't like these things. However, it's the Christian way. If you like to fight because you like power over others, you might need to put people first. Keep going here. If you like attention, like to dress, showing off your skin and trying to get the guys or the girls, you might need to cover up and dress modestly. We live in go avoid the beach. The beach, Skinville. And to say, "Oh, I can handle it," I think you're fooling yourself, because attraction is natural. It's natural to be attracted to. If you swear a lot, using the Lord's name in vain, especially, or if you use the words that are vile, you probably have to do better than that. I mean, people swear a lot. It's not, doesn't look good. Some people do it out of anger. I get that, but then you need to control your anger, and forgive others. If your conversation with friends on the radio is gossipy or putting down others, then you may need to stop participating in that. You can leave the conversation, or I should say, I really don't want to talk about it, or whatever. It's going to be a hard life, because people are caught up in things. Now, gossip and some of this other stuff has been around for years, decades, and centuries, right? What is new to the United States is this type of 2024 living, is that, what was on the TV and what was in common in society has changed. Especially modesty has changed completely. And again, the idea is, if you get caught up in this, which most people have, or then you make a decision not to do it any further and go to confession and work on it, and things will happen in a positive way. If it's your drinking buddies, maybe golf with them, but don't go to the 18th and 19th hole. This is Christian living. Or if you have a beer, that's fine. Again, but you're putting yourself in occasion of sin, and just try to be careful. The other thing is, when you're living in a Christian life, when you start to develop this and exercise this way, it would be living in Christian life now is a form of soft persecution in the United States. In other words, they're not going to probably put you to death for being Christian. However, it won't be easy. You're going to be called weak, prudish, think you're better than others, you're goody two-shoes, or you're boring, you don't like to do anything. This is what you're going to get. Not necessarily, but this is what happens to a lot of people. Or you're called old-fashioned, or there's a lot of things. So that's the difficulty of living in a state of grace. So the kind of rehashing the whole thing, and you get to the next paragraph. Living in a state of grace, you want to remove those things that take you away from God, so to speak. In other words, sin. There's 10 commandments. You know what sins are. If you don't, look up what sins are. And then just do the best you can, but you're going to need help. So go to confession. After confession, you are wiped clean, period. All right? You don't have to keep going back to the same sin you did 2 weeks ago over and over again. You just, once it's done, it's clean. You start anew. Okay, that's the beauty of the Christian life. But, you gotta go on maintain the sacraments, like go to Holy Communion, because we have the tendency to go back to sin, and we need to fight it, and Jesus helps us fight it. It's a perseverance thing, and again, you're gonna fall off. The just man sins 7 times a day. You're gonna fall down, to get back, go to confession, and go back to church, or not go back to church, but go receive Holy Communion. When you are in a state of mortal sin, you cannot receive Holy Communion, because you'll do a double sin. Let's get that out of the way. But if you're in a state of venial sin means it wasn't quite right, but you didn't break a commandment or something major, or you did something you didn't intend it, whatever. That's something you need to discuss. That has to do with formation, and discuss with a priest or whatever. A good priest. Some priests are a little. I'm not going to get into that, but there's priests are different. Some are a little bit wayward nowadays. So trying to live in that life keeps you going in the spiritual life. So life of grace is the spiritual life, and you pray more, etc. And then recall, we don't want to start thinking of you're proud. In a sense, you can be proud of yourself, but don't be prideful. this clean living has its benefits. You have an interior joy. You not always. Oh, that's another movie video, but generally speaking, you feel better. You have more control of what you want to do. You know, people who are hooked on drugs or alcohol, they don't have control over their life. They're always seeking the the addictive to quench the addiction, if you will. They don't. They're in chains because of their addiction, if you will, or whatever it is, gossip, or fighting all the time, or loose living. Loose referring to sexual looseness, if you want to call it that. You're chained to it in a sense. You got to break those chains, and how you break them is confession. And then you got to try to get into the living, by avoiding these situations, which are going to be painful. You're going to have to take care of it now, and then go forward, trying to live the best you can, and lean on the church as best you can to try to go forward. And then finally, don't look at, then when you become living in a state of grace, if you don't look down on your brothers and sisters. And then the last paragraph, remember others went before us who did the same thing. They suffer the consequences in the different times. And recall what Jesus said: when you have done all these things that I commanded you, in other words, you do, whatever it is, you're living a good lifestyle, a life of grace, and you maybe volunteering to help the homeless or poverty or whatever. And then what you say is, when you have done these things that are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done that which we ought to do. In other words, this is what we're supposed to do. We're not better than anybody. We're not, we are sinners just like others are sinners. And we have the decision to choose to not live that lifestyle and try to live a life of grace. Others have maybe more difficulty because they have now physical addictions to whatever they're doing wrong. This could be stealing, it could be sexual addictions, it could be chemical addictions, it could be whatever. Music sometimes can be addictive. So you just say, we have done that which we ought to do. Hope you enjoyed the video, and take care.